What happens when a celebrity's arrogance meets someone who refuses to fight with insults? Keanu Reeves destroys an arrogant host live in The Twist will leave you speechless. Stay tuned to find out how one moment of integrity can bring a man to his knees. The evening was buzzing with excitement as a live streamed event at a luxury hotel went viral. A crowd had gathered in a swanky, dimly lit venue, the air filled with clinking glasses and hushed whispers. On stage, a host was engaging the audience with a series of interviews, making sly comments that caught everyone's attention. But there was something in the air tonight that made this event different. Keanu Reeves, in his usual low-profile manner, walked into the crowded room, his presence immediately drawing eyes. People whispered and cameras subtly shifted in his direction. But he didn't flinch. He had grown accustomed to being in the spotlight, but never craved it. His focus wasn't on the cameras, though. His eyes locked onto the host at the front, a man who had built a career out of making jabs at celebrities. The host, feeling the weight of Keanu's gaze, smiled smugly and addressed the crowd. "Let's have a little fun," he announced. "I've got a question for you all. What's the most overrated thing in Hollywood?" The audience chuckled, and the host's eyes narrowed as they landed on Keanu. "How about you, Mr. Reeves? Any thoughts on that?" Keanu, always a man a few words, shifted uncomfortably in his seat but didn't respond immediately. The crowd awaited, the atmosphere tense with anticipation. The host, sensing Keanu's hesitancy, pushed further. "Come on, don't be shy. You must have an opinion on your peers, especially the ones who think they're above the rest, like Sandra Bullock," he sneered, his voice laced with mockery. The crowd went silent. The host's words had crossed a line. The name Sandra Bullock, a name that for Keanu meant respect and admiration, not mockery, hung in the air. The audience waited for Keanu to respond, certain that he would keep his usual composure. But something was different tonight. Keanu stood up slowly, the room quieting. With a calm but firm voice, he addressed the host, his words simple but cutting. "I think it's a little more difficult to be kind than to tear people down," he said, looking directly at the host. "Maybe you should try it sometime." The room went still. No one had expected this response, not the crowd and certainly not the arrogant host. But Keanu's words weren't just a polite jab. They were an invitation for introspection, a challenge that no one, including the host, could ignore. The host tried to cover his discomfort with a forced laugh. "Well, that's an interesting take, Keanu, but surely you must understand the game we're playing here." His voice wavered slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. "Let's see if you can take a bit of criticism, huh?" Keanu's expression remained unchanged, but there was a flicker of something deeper in his eyes, something that only a few could recognize. It was the calm before the storm, the silent promise of a bigger revelation. He wasn't about to let this go, and neither was the audience. The host continued with his arrogant banter, mocking the very essence of what made Keanu who he was: humble, kind, and fiercely loyal to those who had earned his respect. But Keanu wasn't about to let the audience fall for the host's smoke screen. He would destroy this facade, but not in the way anyone expected. As the night wore on, the host's attempts to provoke Keanu became more frequent, his jabs sharper. Yet Keanu remained cool, his silence heavy with meaning. The more the host tried to provoke, the more Keanu's presence weighed down on him, making him increasingly uncomfortable. The arrogance that had fueled the host's words began to fade, replaced by a nervous tension he couldn't hide. The audience was beginning to see the cracks in the host's confidence. They were witnessing a master class in restraint and understanding the power of silence and simple wisdom. The twist wasn't in Keanu's reaction, it was in the host unraveling the tension in the room. Was palpable as the host's smile began to falter. What was supposed to be a light-hearted segment had suddenly taken a serious turn, and the audience could feel the shift in the air. They were no longer just watching a celebrity interview, they were witnessing a subtle battle of egos, and Keanu Reeves was quietly winning. The host, clearly rattled by Keanu's composed response, shifted gears. He needed to regain control to reassert himself. "I guess Keanu is not a fan of a little fun," the host remarked, his voice losing some of its earlier bravado. "But hey, let's move on," he said, trying to steer the conversation away from his discomfort. The audience, however, wasn't as easily distracted. Keanu, calm as ever, leaned slightly forward. "It's not about fun," he said. His voice was quiet but cut through the noise of the room. "It's about respect. You're mocking people who've built their careers with kindness and dedication. That's not something to joke about." The host's eyes narrowed. He was caught. He had tried to discredit Sandra Bullock, tried to belittle the people who had shaped the industry in their own humble way, and Keanu had called him out on it. The host shifted in his seat, trying to muster the same arrogant energy that had dominated the earlier part of the event. "Oh, come on, we're all adults here. Surely you can take a joke, Keanu," he said, but the words felt hollow. The audience could tell he was trying too hard. Keanu's face remained neutral, but his eyes betrayed something deeper. There was a softness in his gaze, almost like he was pitying the host. "Maybe," Keanu replied quietly, "but it's easy to laugh when you're not the one being made fun of, right?" The crowd gasped. It wasn't just the words, it was the way Keanu delivered them. There was no anger, no sarcasm, just a deep unspoken truth that echoed through the room. For the first time, the host seemed unsure of himself. His arrogance wavered, and for a fleeting moment he looked like a man caught in his own game, wondering if the mask he had built his career on was finally slipping away. The host, desperate to shift the spotlight, turned to the audience with an uneasy grin. Okay, lighten the mood," he stammered. "Keanu's a tough crowd, folks," but the shift in the atmosphere was undeniable. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. They were paying attention, their eyes flicking between Keanu and the host. Keanu didn't let the host off the hook that easily. He had no need to raise his voice or make grand gestures. His next move was quiet, almost imperceptible, yet it would unravel the host in a way he never saw coming. Keanu stood up, the movement slow but deliberate, his presence taking over the stage. The spotlight seemed to shrink in size as Keanu's calm demeanor filled every corner of the room. "I'm not here to make you feel bad," Keanu said, his voice steady, almost soothing. "But when you start mocking others, you lose something of your own." His words hung in the air like a challenge, not just to the host but to everyone in the room. The host tried to brush it off, but Keanu's words had struck a chord. The audience, sensing the shift in power, began to murmur among themselves. The energy was different now. No one was laughing, and the host, who had thought he could control the narrative, was now fighting to keep his grip on the situation. As Keanu turned to leave a Single phrase hung in the air, a soft yet powerful final note that no one could ignore. Respect is earned, not taken, he said quietly without looking back. The host, visibly shaken, watched as Keanu walked away, his shoulders squared and his stride confident. The room, which had once been filled with laughter and superficial banter, was now filled with silence. The audience could feel the weight of the moment. The twist had happened, and it was clear to everyone that Keanu had won, not with force but with quiet strength and integrity. The host, left standing in the center of the stage, felt the uncomfortable reality of his situation. His laughter, once so easy and confident, now felt empty. Keanu had destroyed his carefully constructed persona with a few simple words, leaving the host exposed and vulnerable as the camera zoomed out, capturing the final moments of the exchange. The host's face twisted and frustration, but it wasn't just frustration, it was the realization that he had been exposed for what he was, a man who thrived on making others feel small, and now everyone in the room knew it. The next morning, news of the confrontation between Keanu Reeves and the arrogant host spread like wildfire. Clips of the exchange were all over social media, with people dissecting every word, every glance. Some applauded Keanu for his restraint, for showing the world what real integrity looked like. Others were still in disbelief at how quickly the host's facade had crumbled under the weight of Keanu's quiet words. But for the host, the aftermath was far from glamorous. What had once seemed like an opportunity for fame and clever jabs had turned into a personal and professional crisis. The arrogance he had relied on, the attitude that had kept him in the spotlight, was now exposed for what it was: an act behind the glib remarks and snarky comments. Was a man who feared being vulnerable, who feared showing respect because it might mean losing the upper hand behind closed doors. The host's image began to unravel. Calls from sponsors, invitations to events, all of it stopped. His phone, once flooded with offers, now sat silent. His reputation, built on cruelty and mockery, was now in ruins, and he couldn't escape the echo of Keanu's final words: respect is earned, not taken. In contrast, Keanu's life, though far less tumultuous, took on a new level of admiration. The interviews, the headlines, the support from fans, none of it went to his head. Keanu wasn't the type to revel in the limelight. His response to the event was simple: a few carefully chosen words in an interview where he downplayed the entire confrontation, directing attention back to the values that mattered most to him: kindness, humility, and respect. But the impact of his actions went deeper than anyone expected. People inspired by Keanu's words and his actions began to take a closer look at the way they treated others. The public outcry against the host's treatment of people, especially the jabs aimed at Sandra Bullock, began to resonate with many who had once considered such behavior harmless. The conversation wasn't about Keanu anymore. It was about how society had normalized cruelty and arrogance, and how one moment of integrity could bring it all crashing down. While the world turned its attention to the fallout from the confrontation, Keanu remained focused on what truly mattered to him: doing good in quiet, unremarkable ways. Yet it was clear that the seeds of change had been planted, and people were starting to reflect on their own behavior, inspired by the lesson Keanu had imparted. The host, however, found himself stuck in a dark spiral of regret, For all his attempts to apologize to make amends, the damage had been done. Keanu's quiet words had cut deeper than any insult the host could throw his ego. Once inflated by cruel humor, now felt fragile. He had underestimated Keanu, but more importantly, he had underestimated the power of kindness. In a final attempt to salvage his career, the host arranged a public interview, one in which he planned to apologize for his actions. He hoped this would be the moment to reclaim his dignity, but he was blind to the reality his apology would mean nothing unless it came from a place of true understanding, not from the need to regain lost status. As the host sat in front of the camera preparing his carefully rehearsed words, the public wasn't interested in his apology. They weren't interested in hearing his reasons or his excuses. They had seen the truth. They had seen a man who, despite all his wealth and status, lacked the one thing that truly mattered: respect for others. And they had seen Keanu, a man who didn't need to fight back with insults or boasts, but simply with quiet, resolute integrity. The host's apology fell flat. The audience, already disillusioned with his arrogance, saw through his words. It was too little, too late. Keanu had done what the host couldn't comprehend. He had earned respect not by demanding it, but by showing it to others, and that in the end was what would stay with the public long after the event had faded from the headlines. A week had passed since the fateful exchange at the event, but for the host, the aftermath felt like an eternity. No matter where he went, he couldn't escape the lingering echo of Keanu's words. His once proud public persona, built on sharp wit and mockery, had turned to dust. The sponsors were gone, the offers dried up, and the constant stream of media attention he had once basked in now felt suffocating. He sat in his lavish office, staring out the window at the skyline. The room, once filled with pride, now seemed like a hollow shell. The phone, which used to ring constantly with calls for interviews and appearances, was silent. His name was being forgotten, not because people were forgiving him, but because they simply didn't care about him anymore. Keanu had done what no one else could. He had shown the world that kindness, even in silence, could destroy arrogance faster than any insult could. But it wasn't just the loss of his career that gwed at him. It was the reflection of his own failure. He had always prided himself on being a master of control, able to twist situations to his favor, make people laugh at others' expense, and stand above them with his clever remarks. Yet here he was stripped of that control, stripped of the respect he had so casually taken for granted. It wasn't just the public who had turned their back on him. He realized that deep down he had also lost respect for himself. The host's public apology, the one he had poured his soul into, hadn't worked. No one was buying it. The arrogance he had so carefully built up over the years had been exposed as fragile and shallow. People weren't looking for an apology. They were looking for change, for genuine remorse, for a shift in how he treated others, and that unfortunately was something he wasn't ready to give. Meanwhile, Keanu's life continued in its quiet, humble way. He wasn't out giving interviews or making grand speeches. Instead, he spent his time helping those who needed it most, whether it was a homeless person on the street or a single mother struggling to get by. His actions spoke louder than any words could, and the contrast between him and the host was stark. Keanu's kindness had become a quiet revolution, and the host's arrogance had crumbled under the weight of its truth. But one day, after a particularly quiet evening at home, the host found himself standing before his mirror looking at the man who had once been so full of himself. A flash of realization hit him. He had become what he had mocked, what he had ridiculed in others. His arrogance had been his defense, his way of keeping the world at bay, but it had also been his undoing. In that moment he knew what he had to do. The host had to change, truly change, not for the public, not for the cameras, but for himself. He had to confront the person he had become and acknowledged the damage his words had caused. It wasn't going to be easy. His path to redemption wouldn't be swift, but for the first time in a long while he realized that perhaps it was worth trying to be better, trying to earn the respect he had so carelessly dismissed. The journey ahead wouldn't be about regaining his fame or repairing his image. It would be about learning the value of kindness, humility, and respect. Keanu had destroyed more than just his public persona. That night he had destroyed the host's false belief that mocking others was a way to climb higher. In its place, he had given him the opportunity to rebuild, to truly change. From the inside out, the host picked up the phone, dialing a number he had never thought he'd call. "I need help," he said. Simply, the road to redemption wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in a long while he was ready to walk it.